Thanks so much for joining us for the 5th annual Children's Health Watch Fall Celebration. We're so appreciative of you taking your time this evening to be with us virtually. My name is Dr. Megan Sandel. I'm the co-lead principal investigator of Children's Health Watch, and I'm also the Boston site principal investigator.
And I'm Dr. Diana Cutts, co-lead principal investigator, along with Megan at Children's Health Watch and the Minneapolis site principal investigator. Together with Dr. Stephanie Edinger de Cuba, we formed the leadership team for Children's Health Watch. For those who aren't familiar with us, we are a national leader in advancing evidence-based and racially equitable policies that improve the lives of infants, toddlers, and preschoolers and their families.
We're headquartered here in Boston at Boston Medical Center with research sites in Boston, Little Rock, Minneapolis, and Philadelphia. Our mission is to achieve health equity for young children and their families by advancing research to transform policy.
Many people struggle with how to make meaningful, impactful change when it comes to inequity and other forms of discrimination. It can feel complex and frankly overwhelming. How can we personally dismantle institutionalized racism and discrimination when the progress seems slow, wins are few, and they just seem insurmountable?
That's what we hope to help answer. What can I do? We recognize that deep system change starts with shaping the smallest patterns of our daily lives through even the simplest actions and practices. In other words, small is all, and it can spur transformation, indeed, even a movement.
Thus, the theme for our celebration this year, Equity and You, focuses on how you can be an agent for change right where you are. We hope our program tonight will inspire you to champion and live out equity in every aspect of your life.
With that in mind, we are honored to be in conversation with and present the 2022 Children's Health Watch Champion Award to the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. The award is presented annually to a champion who advocates for equitable, evidence-based policies that help children and families thrive. And this certainly encompasses the work of the Poor People's Campaign under co-chairs Reverend Dr. William Barber II and Liz Theoharis, and their efforts to eliminate poverty, racism, and inequity.
Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephanie Edinger de Cuba, the Executive Director of Children's Health Watch and the moderator of tonight's discussion.
Thanks so much for joining us for the 5th.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight for our 5th annual Children's Health Watch Fall Celebration. We're so appreciative that you took the time out of your day to join us here tonight virtually. My name is Stephanie Edinger de Cuba, and I'm the Executive Director of Children's Health Watch. Before we begin our interactive conversation, I'd really love for you to learn more about our fantastic honorees, the Poor People's Campaign, through this video.
Now is the time for a third reconstruction. We are the rejected, who've been rejected by the politics of trickle-down economics and rejected by neoliberalism. Until children are protected, until sick folk are healed, until low-wage workers are paid, until immigrants are treated fairly, until affordable houses are provided, until the atmosphere, the land, and the water are protected, until saving the world and diplomacy and living in peace is more important than blowing up the world. We won't be silent anymore. If we've got to march, we'll march. If we've got to engage in nonviolent direct action, we'll engage. If we've got to give more attention with the media, if we have to ask workers to make election day a labor strike day, we'll do it. But until then, we won't be
from the bottom, from those most directly impacted by the profound evils of America. It's the poor, it's the low wage, it's the locked up, looked over and left out. It's those excluded and exploited who are the very social force who can change this society.
We're calling upon those who have ears to hear, tongues to speak, and hearts to respond, to join the movement to rid this nation of the evil and violence of poverty.
I have been struggling to pay my bills since I've been working at 16 years old. I work full-time 64 hours a week, 7 days a week. I am exhausted.
We are here today on behalf of every worker and every voter fighting for a government that works for all.
We are here to protect voting rights. We are here to fight for immigration reform.
As a teacher, I want a better future and planet for our children by addressing gun violence and working together to solving our climate crisis.
There are poor and homeless veterans all over this country. We must stand together to demand an end to this war economy that benefits the wealthy at the cost of poor people's lives and health.
Our government finds it necessary to ban abortion, to say that they are saving our children. But more children die as a result of poverty in this country.
I'm here because I'm holding fast to that promise of freedom that our ancestors fought for. They were fighting for our ability to control our own bodies, to determine our own futures, to be the architects of our own destinies. And that's the fight that we're fighting right now.
This system doesn't provide health care or living wages, but it wages chemical warfare.
We should not be cornered and forced to choose one necessity over another.
I am here to tell you, incarcerated lives matter too. We are forgotten people. We are poor people, and we are suffering.
I have been faced with many challenges in my life due to a broken system that has a long history of punishing the poor while rewarding the corrupt, wealthy class.
It's time for us to stop being passive Christians. We gotta get up.
That's it, bro.
We gotta get off of those comfortable pews.
That's it.
We gotta get out of these churches.
That's it.
We gotta get out here and we gotta advocate for the least of these.
And so we stand on that principle in this country, that no matter where we live, no matter what my background is, no matter who I love, no matter what I can do, at the end of the day, I am deserving to be treated like a human being.
Our votes this November are not a show of support. They are a demand.
We are here. We are the poor and dispossessed, and we are here.
Yeah, now is our time for a third Reconstruction. We are not an insurrection, but we are a resurrection.
Adelante juntos. Adelante juntos. Ni un paso atrás.
That was very moving and inspiring. And I have to say, I actually was there with my colleague, Allison, and it was an incredible day, a very, very moving day. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight. By way of introduction, I want to briefly tell you a little bit about Children's HealthWatch and the award that we're presenting, and then tell you about our honorees. So for those who don't know us, Children's HealthWatch is a network of pediatricians, public health researchers, and policy experts committed to achieving health equity for young children and their families by advancing research to transform policy. We're based at Boston Medical Center, and we're doing research on the front lines of pediatric care in urban safety net hospitals in Boston, Little Rock, Minneapolis, and Philadelphia. And we've provided timely evidence to support robust policy efforts that reduce hardship and improve health equity using our work. And so since 1998, our multi-site network has surveyed more than 80,000 caregivers of young children ages 0 to 4. We then use that research to inform public policies and practices that give all children and their families equal opportunities for healthy, successful lives. And equipped with that 24 years of unique child-focused research, we work in coalition with partners across the country and throughout each of our states to bring data and experience from the front lines to those who have the power to make systems and policy change. For the past 3 years, our equity series has explored how structural racism and xenophobia directly affect the health and well-being of young children and their families. And we've highlighted how policies have been weaponized to deepen racial inequities, and also on the other side, how they can be intentionally crafted to dismantle systems of oppression. So as part of Children's Health Watch continued commitment to this work, our 2022 equity series, Equity and You, has examined how each of us personally can advance health equity for our children and families, and how those personal actions can contribute to a collective movement and narrative change. So this evening, I'm really excited to kick off the celebration with the presentation of our 2022 Children's Health Watch Champion Award. Each year, we give this award to a champion who advocates for and advances evidence-based policies that promote equity and help children thrive. And so that's why it's my honor and privilege to present this year's award to Reverend Dr. William Barber II and Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, the co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, A National Call for Moral Revival. Reverend Dr. Barber and Reverend Dr. Theoharis and the Poor People's Campaign really, they embody the spirit of the award and their conviction that all people deserve to be safe, healthy, and financially secure. Conceived and organized in 1968 by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Poor People's Campaign has long championed policies that benefit children and families economically and promote racial equity. Their advocacy around fair wages, quality housing, education, healthcare, and many other areas of impact seeks to ensure that economic policies improve child and family health, help lift families out of poverty, and support equity. And as the current leaders of this movement, Reverend Barber and Reverend Theoharis have organized and mobilized communities to build power, moral activism, and voter participation to advance the campaign's moral and economic policy agenda. And Children's Health Watch is inspired by their constant and continued commitment, and honored to have the opportunity tonight to celebrate these achievements. Reverend Barber, unfortunately, is unable to join us this evening. He's unwell, so we're sending him very good wishes, but we're sending congratulations to you both. And I want to turn to you, Reverend Theoharis, and invite you to say a few words.
Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, and to Child Health Watch. It's amazing to be here and to accept this amazing award, this champion award, not on behalf of just myself and Bishop Barber, but of the 40 coordinating committees of Poor People's Campaign leaders all across the country, the thousands of faith leaders, the hundreds of organizations that have partnered to build, one of the most sustainable and vibrant social justice movements, led by those that are most impacted by injustice, by racism, by poverty, by ecological devastation, by militarism and the war economy, and by this false narrative, this narrative that pits us against each other, that claims that, this is as good as it gets, that we don't have abundance, we have scarcity, and that, tries to blame poor people and low-income people and for all of society's problems. And so it's amazing to get this. Again, I'm thinking about the thousands of people all across this country, some of the 140 million people who are poor and low income in this, the richest country in the world, who wake up every day thinking about how to build a movement that can overcome all of these injustices and that can lift from the bottom so that everybody rises. And so it's on behalf of this powerful movement of people that really appreciate Children's Health Watch and this champion award and are surely committed to keep up the fight to have everybody having the right to live, because right now that is being denied to too many people.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, thank you for that. And I think there's so much there that we can dig into this evening. I really appreciate you joining us for this interactive discussion. So just for the audience's purposes, we're going to have a little bit of conversation now, but please be putting questions in the chat, and then we'll be bringing in those audience questions as well. So yeah, lots of things to dig in here but I thought maybe for folks who aren't as familiar with the Poor People's Campaign, we just had this terrific video and a little intro here, but if you could talk a little bit more about the history, the sort of moral movement that started in the late 60s with Dr. King and others, and trying to really have that revolution of values. And so for those who are a little unfamiliar, maybe a little bit more about the origins of the Poor People's Campaign and how it's evolved over these past 55 years, because some things are very much the same and other things are very different.
Well, amazing. So indeed, in 1967, as Reverend Dr. King puts out this call that connects the injustices, the evils, as he calls them, of racism, of militarism and war, and of poverty and economic exploitation. He says, really that the Achilles heel of all of those systems of injustice is to unite and organize poor people across geography, across race, across religion, across issue area into a powerful force for change. Now, we are living, 55 years later, as you said. And there's in fact 60% more poor and low income people today than there were back, 55 years ago.
Wow.
And we would need to build a Poor People's Campaign, even if Dr. King and the welfare rights leaders and others hadn't all those years ago. Because again, there are 43% of the US population that is living in poverty or some form of economic disparity, when we have the wherewithal, when we have the resources to actually, address all of these issues. So back then, it wasn't just Dr. King, it was welfare rights leaders, it was folks in Appalachia, it was, folks that were organizing, from the Mississippi Delta to the kind of poor barrios and ghettos of across the country, who came together and said, if we can bring thousands of people to Washington, D.C., we can become this new and unsettling force in our complacent national life, and organize and mobilize and really call attention to this injustice. So, now what we're doing today is organizing not just in Washington, D.C., though obviously on June 18th, we had one of the largest gatherings of poor and low income people in U.S. history. We launched the Poor People's Campaign 5 years ago, almost 5 years to this week, where we, gathered people in Washington, D.C. and said that we were going to launch with the largest wave of nonviolent civil disobedience in U.S. history. And when we did that, and we've kept on organizing, really building up these state-based and locally based struggles and communities. Some of the folks that are a part of the Poor People's Campaign today, were a part of that campaign 55 years ago. And then there's many, many folks that are, teenagers and young people who, and others that weren't born, but who are impacted by the injustices and evils of our society and who are organizing today. And so we come together and are building this movement. We're calling for a moral revolution of values, a revival of our deepest truths and love and peace and justice. And we're constantly trying to organize and mobilize this powerful force of poor and low income people.
Thank you for, yeah, I think that's one of the things that's very impressive about it is the sort of incredible age span that is involved in the movement. It's very, very impressive to get everyone from teenagers to older folks who've been doing it since the 60s. It's quite amazing. So how is COVID and the growing awareness of this racial reckoning that we've been having nationally over these last several years impacted your work? And I want to add on to that a little bit too. And how has that changed your mobilizing, given that we've had to go to what we're doing right now, these kinds of virtual world things?
Yeah, I mean, so we were getting ready to organize a massive engagement, massive mobilization of people in 2020, and we had actually been a part of a dozens of state tour. It was the third one of those rounds of tours that we were on, and then COVID hit. And what we know about COVID is that it just really both deepened and brought to consciousness already existing inequalities, right? So when COVID hit, because so many of the folks that are part of the Poor People's Campaign, poor and low income people, folks without healthcare, folks, working, as Bishop Barber will say, being called essential workers, but being paid expendable wages and treated as expendable. I mean, because of that, we actually called really early. We realized we couldn't gather in person. So we moved that powerful Moral March on Washington to an online gathering. And it was really, 2 million people at least showed up. It was one of the largest gatherings of poor and low income people online, again, in history. And we were able to kind of put out, face and names of the conditions that people are facing. Again, what COVID did was it just spread on the kind of fissures, as some of the public health folks that we've done work with, talked about, kind of spread and deepened those fissures of racism, those fissures of inequality and low wage work, and those fissures of the lack of healthcare. I mean, how is it that we have been now experiencing, the worst health crisis, in generations, in a century, and yet we haven't significantly expanded, healthcare? How is it that, again, that we now are recognizing the heroic work that low wage workers have done, and yet we have failed to pass a minimum wage increase in 13 years? Like, how is it that, we know that COVID itself impacted poor and low income people incredibly disproportionately, right? I mean, many folks talked about COVID right at the beginning and actually throughout as a great equalizer. And while that disease itself did not discriminate, our society has, right? And so that, what we've been able to show and put out there is that, poor and low income people in the poorest counties in this country, have died at rates of 2 to even 5 times the amount of higher income people and richer counties. And, so again, this has been a poor people's pandemic. And it has really, at the same time as people have lost significant income, have been put into even more precarious situations. It also, the richest people in our society and our world have gotten that much richer. And so, what we're doing is continuing to organize. I mean, it just shows all the more why we need a moral movement of people, and why we have to have those, as Frederick Douglass would say, who would be free, striking this first blow and uniting and organizing and pressing forward. And so, we have surely had to adjust. The gathering that we held this past June that folks saw the video of, I mean, it was 2 years delayed. But in that time, what we've seen is that people have built, strong communities and connections amongst tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of poor and low income people, and just kept on trying to organize from there.
Yeah, I think the really important things that you've been saying here. And I think the piece about the fissures in society, your report, I think, is really terrific. And maybe we can put that link in the chat for the audience. It's a really great report on the story map that you created. I want to invite you to say a little bit more about what you found in that report. Because yes, we've heard other people say, yes, that, sort of marginalized communities were the first ones to die at higher rates of COVID and things like that. But I think you added a whole nother level of nuance in that report that I found really moving and really infuriating too. Like, we we need to move, we need action on this. So I wondered if you could just, for folks who haven't read that report and haven't seen this really terrific story map, I wonder if you would say a little bit more about it.
Well, for sure. I mean, so we put out this Poor People's Pandemic Report right as the country was getting way too close to, and now has passed the 1 million people who have died from COVID. Again, in a country that spends more money on healthcare than anywhere else, and yet has had this disproportionate amount of death. Again, a lot connected to this problem of poverty and the wages and the lack of healthcare. I mean, and one of the things that was really important about this Poor People's Pandemic Report, in addition to showing that, again, 2 to 5 times the number of deaths. I mean, just take that in. I mean, just that many more poor people died. And you can see actually other than that first wave, that initial wave in COVID, every subsequent wave is just killing poor people. And that's not even speaking to how many people are getting sick and having long COVID and having to figure out how to kind of make ends meet, even though it's pretty hard to do that. And what was interesting is that the whole conversation really has been about vaccination and some of these other questions, and they're important concerns and questions to have. But what we found was that it wasn't just a vaccination approach alone actually couldn't kind of address the issues. The fact that so many of the counties that had the most amount of deaths were counties where there were a huge high percentage of folks that just did not have healthcare. And in fact, some of the loss that happens both because of COVID, but also because of basically kind of the lack of healthcare that people were able to access over the course of years. And so, we tried to do some case studies showing that the fact that our public health kind of infrastructure and organizations, do not track and have not tracked, income and kind of jobs and poverty, right? I mean, how are you going to put together powerful, healthcare and public health policy if you don't even know the impact that it's having on poor and low income communities? And so, this study that we put out, working with the Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Professor Jeffrey Sachs and a team of amazing researchers connected to Howard University and other institutions, was really the first of its kind of these kinds of studies, putting out connecting poverty and COVID. And so I do encourage folks to check that out, because there's still so many significant learnings in there that, again, we as a society would do well to learn from, both in how we continue to address the economic crisis we're experiencing, the public health crisis that actually is continuing, and as well as how we prepare for the next kind of crises and pandemics as they arise.
Right. Yes. Thank you for that. And I think in all of this, and I think what's also powerful in all of the weaving in of data and these, big societal gaps and inequities, you're really bringing forward the voices and action and experiences of folks with low income. So I wondered if you could talk about how you amplify those voices in your movement, and in particular, how you think about your policy priorities. I mean, you've just named a bunch of them, but like how you think about your policy priorities and campaign decision making with those experiences at the fore. How do you come to the list of priorities that you put forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important question, because we're very interested in impacting policy, because right now we don't have policies being kind of based on the actual living situations and of poor and low income people. And so, when we launched the Poor People's Campaign, before we launched, we actually put together a study. It was called the Souls of Poor Folk audit. And we looked at what had happened in the 50 years since Reverend Dr. King and others had launched and called for a Poor People's Campaign. And that's actually where we found this number, 140 million people who are poor and low income. That's where we put out that, it's 53 cents of every discretionary dollar that this country has is spent on the military. That's where we showed that, 4 million people and households can get unleaded gas and get unleaded paint, but they have lead in the water in their pipes when they turn their faucets on in the morning. And a whole lot of other kind of actual empirical data. And it was out of that audit that then we put together an agenda. And that moral agenda was the set of demands that we put forward and have continued to put forward in the organizing work that we do in the Poor People's Campaign, and when we do actions or protests or educationals or any of the kind of advocacy work that we do. And so in the kind of those agenda points, those come out of the kind of experience of poor and low income folks, both in the kind of what people are doing to survive, and but also we often will talk about the plight of poor and low income people, but also the struggles and the kind of insights that people are making as folks wage a rent strike, or as people put forward a healthcare campaign or cancel their medical debt, and so or come up with more just immigration policies. And so so many of the kind of policy prescriptions that we have put forward as the Poor People's Campaign come from this important data work that we do, as well as the kind of the lives and bodies of poor and low income folks that are in struggle putting solutions forward. And so that's again like coming out of the struggle in Flint around poisoned water. We were able to hear some of those demands and try to then kind of nationalize and put those forward as a part of our larger agenda. And then we did the work of talking about how are we going to pay for this, right? And we put together a Poor People's Moral Budget, and we actually presented that budget to the budget committee of the House of Representatives, and we said, guess what? If we had a fair taxation system, if we cut the military budget significantly and made this country actually safer, and if we invested in the kind of programs like a child tax credit, programs like a minimum wage increase, programs like universal health care, that those investments actually would redound to the benefit of all, and that would both help the lives of millions, tens of millions of poor and low income people, as well as we say in this campaign, lift from the bottom so that everybody could rise. And so so much of that agenda, of our budget, of the demands that we put forward, and policy solutions to the problems that people are facing, come out of these struggles and come out of the also diligent kind of policy work and that of partnerships with different organizations, including Children's HealthWatch and the work that you all are doing.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique and fantastic model that you have of really bringing in the grassroots, the grass tops, the researchers, and everybody coming together around a core agenda and kind of bringing their strengths. I wondered now if we could go to some of the audience questions. Let's see, we have here's one about the wealth gap. It says the wealth gap seems to be getting larger and larger. How can the Poor People's Campaign reach the hearts and minds of some of our wealthiest individuals and encourage them to get involved and help find ways to shrink the gap? Government has tried for decades, but it's clear that other individuals need to lend support. Wonder how you might respond to
Yeah,
that.
so I really appreciate this question. And, you know,
Oh, did we lose you momentarily? Okay, well, oh, there, I think she's joining again. There we go. All right, great. Glad you're back. There you go. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry about that. I don't know, I lost you. But anyways,
Zoom world.
I love this question about the role of people with wealth, with a conscience, that we talk about a lot in our Poor People's Campaign. Because while poor and low income people are playing, key leadership roles, we also see that it's very possible, and in fact, in our coordinating committees, in the actions that we do, in the organizing that folks are part of, we have many people who have significant means, but who are worried about this impoverished democracy that we're living in. And I think that again, I mean, what we know and what we've heard from folks like Nobel kind of laureate economists like Joseph Stiglitz and others, that the cost of inequality, the cost of poverty actually are far greater than the cost to resolve this. And I think that when it comes to things like the wealth gap, that this kind of level of inequality isn't just impacting it hurts poor and low income people first and worst, but it's actually kind of eating away at the society as a whole. And so we have found that people from many different walks of life, from different racial and ethnic groups, different gender, sexualities, different concern about different issue areas, but also from different incomes and kind of wealth statuses, have found that coming together and building these kind of fusion coalitions of people, reaching across all these lines that have historically divided us, makes for a powerful way of doing work and of building a movement. And so we welcome anyone, wherever you are, whoever you are, however you are, to be involved in this work.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's very motivating, and hopefully we can spread that word and bring in more of those folks. Kind of a related question here. The immigration crisis only seems to be getting worse. How's the Poor People's Campaign working to address these new constituents while still meeting or addressing the needs of the poor already among us? And what more can we as citizens do to help?
Well, I think it's really important for us to talk about this question of unjust immigration policies. And it's important also that the Poor People's Campaign, when we do our work, we talk about starting with the problem of systemic racism, because can you hear me? Sorry, I thought I lost you. Because it's really the original sins of this nation, and so that's the genocide of Native and Indigenous people. That's years and years, generations of U.S. chattel slavery. It's also in unjust immigration policies, really from our very founding. And as I was in Georgia with Bishop Barber last night, he was making the point again when it comes to the question of immigration that we should be clear that it wasn't that people are crossing borders into the U.S. It's that the U.S. early on crossed that border and took over Mexico and other places, and that's true all across the world, right? And so I think what's important and has been a part of our demands from the outset has been just immigration policies. I mean, that the right to citizenship, the right to vote, the right to access all of the kind of social programs that will improve people's lives and lives. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And so what we have in these coordinating committees all across the country are folks that are poor and low income Latinos and Asians and folks from the Middle East. It's poor and low income Black and white, and folks from really all over, because this is an issue. And the question of poverty, both in the U.S. but also across the world, if we see what the U.S. policies are doing in other countries, we also better understand why we have many folks who are trying to immigrate into this country, but finding really for an American dream, but really finding an American nightmare when folk get here. And so a strong part of our policy platform is about immigration reform, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's these questions of wealth and very wealthy people not wanting to let go, as well as this question around immigration. They seem, in my mind anyway, very much related. And the "I've got mine, you can't have it" kind of attitude. And so maybe this is a way for me to ask about, you talk a lot about this moral narrative and moral revival, and maybe can you say a little bit more about what that is, and also then how you use that to help move people, and to your points earlier about this is actually better for all of us when we're fairer all around, right? So maybe you can say a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to say more about this question of the kind of distorted narrative, because I just think, for so long in our society, we have kind of blamed immigrants and blamed young people and blamed queer people and blamed women and blamed poor people and Black people, for all of society's problems. And this is, a very, we kind of deemed some people deserving and others undeserving, right? And this is not just amongst extremists. This is kind of been normalized into the absolute center of our politics. We either, kind of punish and demonize poor and low income people, or we completely ignore them. And kind of have made poor a four-letter word in our kind of national vocabulary, and so I think what's important is a huge part of the work we're trying to do in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is about shifting that narrative. I mean, it's about putting out the realities of injustice in our society, but also the solutions that are at hand, and the resources that we have to actually lift that load of poverty. And so we've talked about how, really the two goals of the Poor People's Campaign are to shift that narrative and to build power amongst the 140 million poor and low income people. And those will be our goals until we're able to achieve those. Because, for too long, these issues have not been at the absolute center of our political discourse. And that is to the detriment of the whole society. I mean, so for instance, right now, we just went through a midterm election, and Georgia is still in a runoff. 1/3 of the U.S. electorate are poor and low income people. That's not a small or insignificant number of people. And we have attacks on our democracy and on our voting rights. And all of this leads us to be living in what is actually an impoverished democracy. Now, that impoverishment of our democracy affects everybody. Sure, of course, it impacts poor and low income people the most. Folks whose rights are being denied, who are struggling to make ends meet. But again, what we saw with COVID, what we see with any kind of problem that is larger in our society, is that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And if you can deny some group of people over here, adequate standard of living, then guess what? Everyone's adequate standard of living is up for kind of attack and debate. And again, just like kind of the fissures of racism, of poverty, of inequality, help to spread and deepen this terrible public health crisis. It means that if anyone doesn't have health care, then everyone is being impacted. It means that if any child is going to a resegregated, inferior school where they're not learning about the full history and kind of vision of dignity and rights, that our whole society is weaker and worse off for it. And I think that this kind of intersectionality and inseparability of injustice and of also then justice is a huge part of the work that the Poor People's Campaign is trying to do, and a huge part of our kind of theory of change. Where again, it does not have to be this way. We have the resources. If we raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour tomorrow, which we could do, our policymakers have that power, right? What it would mean is, $368 billion entering our economy. What that's going to help, like the little bodega across the street from where I live. What that's going to do? It's going to, increase the kind of, the buying and the spending and everything. I mean, small businesses are going to flourish. Folks are going to be able to, send their kids to the camps that they weren't able to before. I mean, all of that, and that redounds to the benefit of all. And we need to kind of proclaim that and understand that, and then, work our butts off to make it a reality.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think that's such a great point that there are solutions. I think sometimes people think, oh, poverty, intractable. It's always been with us, never going to change. But I think what's really inspiring about the work that you do is and it's the attitude that we have at Children's Health Watch as well, is there are solutions. We aren't stuck, right? So that's extremely inspiring to hear, and the wave of benefits that come with that attitude and that action. We're going to turn now to a few videos that we've put together to talk about. I actually think you will see a lot of why we love the work of the Poor People's Campaign, because it is so very aligned with the way that we think about the world and the work that we are trying to do. But before we turn to that video, I just want to thank you again, Reverend Theoharis. I just love listening to you speak. I always am inspired afterwards and always learn so much. So thank you so much for making the time to be here. Really, really grateful to you and to Reverend Barber for all the wonderful work that you are doing, and to everyone that's part of the Poor People's Campaign.
Well, thank you so much. And Children's Health Watch is a powerful and mighty organization, and hope everyone supports the work you're doing as well. It's great to be a partner with you all.
Likewise. Terrific. All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to turn to our video, and thank you all very much for joining us. And we hope you enjoy the video that we put together for you.
At Children's Health Watch, we have long been committed to improving health for young children and their families through evidence-based policy. For decades, our research and policy advocacy has focused on advancing solutions to alleviate hardships. But in 2017, we recognized that we hadn't gone far enough. The rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and national reckoning around racial equity led us to re-examine our organizational values and make an explicit commitment to centering equity. We formed working groups to explore and contemplate the role of race and equity in our work, both internally and externally. Our staff and leadership took part in trainings, workshops, and conversations, resulting in an explicit commitment to anti-racism in all aspects of our work. This process led us to create our annual Equity Town Hall series, which has invited the broader community into this journey.
For centuries, policies and practices have worked in concert to perpetuate structural racism. Undoing these harms and building an anti-racist future requires commitment to policies that specifically reduce inequities. Our work seeks to advance equity-promoting solutions and ensure racist policy proposals are swiftly repealed. Equipped with our unique data, we have defended access to housing, healthcare, nutrition programs, and economic supports, and helped stop efforts to cut families off from critical assistance.
We continue to use our research to advocate for meaningful investments in nutrition, housing, childcare, direct cash payments, healthcare initiatives, and an equitable tax code that would stabilize families with young children and bolster their health. We also engage with federal and state agencies to identify specific opportunities to carry out meaningful and inclusive policy change and to ensure that programs reduce racial inequities and effectively benefit the nearly 27 million children in the United States living in families with low incomes.
Our unique approach aligns our research with our policy focus by intentionally focusing on the experience of families we interview and the ways hardships, discrimination, public policies, and the COVID-19 pandemic affect them. We've modernized our survey, allowing us to have a multi-dimensional understanding of families' experience. This included adding a longitudinal study, allowing us to be in conversation with families and their children over time. In 2023, with your support, we will reach back out to those families for the third time since the pandemic hit to learn how their lives have changed. We've had the privilege of working with partners like the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice to conduct policy-relevant research and reach new audiences. We continue to expand our research to deepen our knowledge of how health system interventions can improve health. And we have continued to expand our expertise through equity-focused pilot interventions, including a cash transfer demonstration and an economic mobility intervention for families with children.
If we've realized one thing this past year, it's that our work is far from over. As we prepare to mark our 25th anniversary in 2023, we intend to continually strengthen and expand our equity-focused policy and research in exciting new ways. We hope you'll continue to join us on this journey as we advance research to transform policies. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the illustrious Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, an advisory board member here at Children's HealthWatch with a passion for advocacy, public service, and political activism, and a deeply held commitment to civil rights, fairness, and equity. Charlotte?
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Cerlyn, for that warm introduction. And congratulations to Children's HealthWatch on another year of significant accomplishment. Wasn't that a wonderful discussion, guided by our moderator, Dr. Stephanie Ettinger de Cuba, and Children's HealthWatch champions, Reverend Barber and Reverend Theoharis of the Poor People's Campaign. Their work to combat systemic racism, poverty, and other roadblocks to equity supports children and families in having every chance to live full and healthy lives. And on the subject of support, today, Children's HealthWatch needs yours. I serve on the Children's HealthWatch Advisory Board, and in that role, and also as a former state legislator, I've seen how valuable research and data are in shaping state and national policies, whether we're talking about expanding nutrition assistance or making improvements to the child tax credit or earned income tax credit, or increasing access to affordable housing. These policies support the health and economic stability of families who need them most. This is the focus of Children's HealthWatch, to get relevant, credible research and data into the hands of people who will make the right decisions, the decisions that directly impact the health and well-being of children and their families. But it costs money to produce accurate, reliable research and data. And as Children's HealthWatch is holding this, their one and only fundraiser for the year, we have an opportunity to support this very impactful work. So, if you believe that equitable policies should be a given and not an exception, then please take this next important step. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to www.childrenshealthwatch.org/donate and give as generously as you can today. Your gift will help in the effort to combat poverty and promote equity, and it will be wisely utilized and very much appreciated. Thank you.